welcome back to the PB&J podcast, where we talk to pioneers and builders here in the city of Jacksonville, Florida. Today, I have with me Travis Webb, my first boss in the staffing industry, and now the VP of Sales at Parqa. Travis, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Randall.
Of course. Hey, obviously, I know you quite well, but for those who are listening and tuning in that don't know you, can you give them a little bit of an idea who you are and your background?
Sure, absolutely. So, as Randall mentioned, VP of Sales for a company called Parqa. We do optimization consulting in the staffing and recruiting industry, specific to the Bullhorn and Salesforce ecosystems. Talking about Jacksonville, I'm a native, so born and raised here. Married to my wonderful wife, Colleen. It'll be 24 years in October. She's also from Jacksonville, and we have 3 kids. I say kids, 2 of them are adults, and the third one is very close to being an adult. So, got quite the family here. My family was raised here. My wife's family was here. So tons of roots here to the Jacksonville community.
Yeah, and one of them goes to the greatest school in the state of Florida, too. So shout out to the Seminole and the family.
Did they make the playoffs? I can't remember.
In my head, they did. So when I first kicked off the call, I said you were my first boss in recruiting. I've been now doing this for 7 years. I was famously in our group, we talked about it all the time. I was fixing helicopters beforehand. But when I came in, one of the strong selling points of being at Modus at the time was we had a really strong foundation of staffing leaders already there, you being one of them. How long up until that point had you been in the game, and kind of walk us through the journey of your staffing life?
Sure. So, everybody says it, but it's the truth, right? I stumbled into it by accident. By trade, I have a degree in drafting and design technology. I worked for an engineering firm for about 6 months and realized quickly that sitting behind a computer all day doing electrical design and lighting design and listening to a plotter go off next to my ear for 8 hours a day wasn't for me. Like, I needed to be out in front of people. Went to a separate sales role, and then my older brother actually started a small staffing company, and that's how I got into it. When they needed a salesperson, hopped in a small little company here in Jacksonville. About 2 years into that, went to work for Robert Half Technology. So went from a small startup to one of the biggest ones in the game, which was a culture shock, but it was definitely a learning experience. I learned a lot there. I'd only been really doing temporary staffing, got in, I ran their perm division. Ended up staying at Robert Half for about 9 years, decided it was time for a change. I went to another startup and realized pretty quickly that I'm not sure I was ready for startup life again at that point, right?
Yeah.
And the opportunity at Modus came available. So being a Jacksonville guy growing up, seeing the Modus logo on the building downtown, they had an opportunity for a managing director in Jacksonville. And I'm like, this is a perfect fit. I'm a Jacksonville guy. It's a Jacksonville company. Got an opportunity to hop in there. I'll become the managing director. I ended up staying at Modus for right at 6 years and ended up running Florida, several offices. And then I got out during the pandemic, kind of right in the early pandemic. So was ready for a change after 18 years and still think it was a good choice, although it got really good in staffing right after I left.
Yeah.
So probably had another couple more fun years, but no, I decided to actually transition out of staffing altogether. I got an opportunity to work for a real estate prop tech startup out of San Francisco, building their community in the Florida market. So I was there for just under 2 years, grew from 3 partners to 100 partners in the state. Got the dreaded call of, hey, great job, but we're going to get rid of half the staff in 2 weeks, and we're going to manage it all from California. So I found myself kind of back pondering life and what I'm going to do. And ironically enough, one of the things that I love about Jacksonville is the networking community. And all the way back to the Robert Half days, I was very involved with the Chamber of Commerce, the Jacksonville IT Counsel. I love the fact that I still go to these meetings and there's folks that I recruited and somehow convinced to get on the board with me 10, 15 years ago are still involved in it. And I went to their Tech Coast conference and I ran into a gentleman named Tom Roush who worked for me for a little while at Modus when I got there. told him what I had going on. And Tom said, hey, look, I talked to this really cool company up in Minneapolis. They're doing something in the staffing and recruiting space on the other side of it, not staffing and recruiting. You should at least have a conversation with them. So that's what actually led me to Parqa. So next thing I knew, I was flying to Minnesota. I was meeting the team at Parqa, and all the things I had wanted from a manager in the staffing company, from marketing and recruiting and sales and things like that, that I needed from a strategy level, were all the things that we do now for staffing and recruiting companies. So after 18 and a half years, I took a little break, but I found myself back in it, just on the other side of the desk now. Yep. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm really excited to unpack that part with you. But admittedly, a lot of the people that are going to be watching this are going to be watching this because they knew you, me, or both of us through our staffing days together. So they're probably going to have some interest in hearing some of the staffing parts of the story. And then obviously, I really want to talk about the marketing piece because it's incredibly important.
Absolutely.
Especially in 2020. So when you made the move, you went from like a boutique firm with your brother to Robert Half, which, yes, in terms of scope and size is substantially larger. What were the biggest differences? When you said it was a culture shock, what did you experience and what was different about the two environments?
It was the introduction to really managed metrics and KPIs. So, working for a small company with my brother, we had a couple of key accounts. We're able really to grow the business and drive it, versus walking into a bullpen that had, 40 cubicles. If you want to call them a cubicle, I call it the 4 feet of fame. You had your little desk and there was no privacy. And so I went from an office to sitting in a small cube and, making sure being asked to make a certain amount of calls each day and a certain amount of placements and learning the acronyms, the MPCs and all of the different things. So that was really the biggest shock was, I was cruising along and kind of doing my own thing. And then all of a sudden it's like you're in this fishbowl and it's 100% on 100% of the time. So that was the biggest culture shock for sure.
Okay. And then famously you transitioned from Robert Half to Modus, but when you went to Modus, it was almost like it was a full rebuild, right? Didn't they kind of lose out? I think they were kind of a skeleton crew at that point, and you accepting that job, you were under the impression like, I'm gonna have to completely rebuild this team, rebuild the clients, the client list. So how big of a culture shock was that compared to going from boutique to Robert Half?
Well, I knew. So one of the things of my personality, I'm a builder, right? So when people say like, what do you like to do or what gets you up in the morning, right? Like I like to build things. I like a challenge. If you said, hey, Travis, I've got this staffing operation, they're at 100% of quota, they're humming along, just come in and take it over. Quite honestly, that really doesn't interest me because that's just keeping the lights on and keeping everybody moving, right? Versus, hey, we've gone through some transition. We've lost a couple of our biggest customers. We've had a ton of turnover. We need you to come in and fix this. And I'll never forget, I got there my first day and I walked in and we had a space that probably had, come back to think of it, maybe 40 cubicles in it. And I think we had 7 or 8 people. And I mean, we had one person on one end of the office, one in the other. People had their own sets of 6 cubicles. We had people that were in offices. And I remember calling my boss the first day and he says, what do you think? And I said, I've seen more energy at a funeral. And, it's a bad thing to say, but
yeah,
I was in shock. Like I was really questioning like, hey, did I make the right decision? And it didn't get any easier. Like we lost more people over the next few weeks. I think I lost 3 more people. But over time, we were able to build it back up. We brought in the right people. We built the team kind of block by block. And it didn't happen overnight. It took us time. But then, fast forward a few years later and you look at what we were able to accomplish while you were there. We built a fun culture, probably too fun at times. I know for people that were in the office with us eventually probably did not care for our shenanigans of Nerf guns and cornhole and the fun we had. We like to celebrate. We had a good time. But I think that what was key is we had a good time doing it. And I think the icing on the cake was being at the national meeting, having no idea. And they announced the highest Great Place to Work survey results. And
Jacksonville,
I
Florida.
won that for Jacksonville, right? So I would say we probably had the most complaints for having too much fun in the office that same year, but then to get rewarded with that and walk up on stage for building what we built was fantastic. So that was definitely a highlight. And I still have, can't see it here, it's up above me here, but I have that trophy right up here above my left shoulder.
Yeah, it's awesome you say that, because right here I have a trophy case just for Modus, and it's a mix of some of the All-Star awards and the Rookie of the Year award, but there's some team awards in here too. We've got like metric champions, we've got a branch of the year. There's a couple of other ones over there that's really cool.
You also have the antique wrestling championship belt behind you there too in the background. I see that. I recognize that for sure.
I do. So I was meeting. Obviously, I was meeting. I told you I met with Rich Thompson earlier today. It's the first thing he saw. He goes, "Dude, what a belt! Like, what is that from?" And I told him a story. I said, I was fixing helicopters before I started staffing, and I knew when I got hired that there was going to be a mountain to climb to understand this job. But I also think that you and Jason Bush and Paul Fogel knew that as well. Like, hey, we don't know what we have here, and that's fair. So I told him, we were working on some placements out of the gate, and I believe you said if I got a certain amount of submittals or placements or spread number or whatever, that I could get it. I could have it. And I'll never forget that I think I made the placement and like hit the submit button in the system. And I walked into your office. I slid the door open. I didn't say a single word to you. I just grabbed the belt, closed the door, went right back to my desk, and you knew why I was there to get it. And obviously it meant something to me. I've been holding on to it ever since. So
that's great. Now we had a few different items there. We had a baseball bat at one point. I'm not sure that was somebody else's idea. Definitely not mine. You probably have that too, but we had all kinds of
I do have the bat. Yeah.
Small things there that we had in the office that were fun.
Yeah. Well, there were some small things in that office for sure. So I want to talk about, because we touched on the culture part. You won the greatest place to work survey award for the company. I think when you were talking about building it block by block, a lot of the like affordability you had in doing that was the retention of the people that you already had, the blocks that you had already put in place.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that was through the Nerf gun wars or the cornhole or the company happy hours that we went to, where we continued to bond. And I truly feel that, as you know, by how close we all are still to this day, that we were more than just coworkers there. We absolutely were friends and family, and we cared about everybody's well-being. But I want to talk about the importance of culture and maybe what it's like to establish a brand new culture. So you came into Modus, you had to rebuild this team brick by brick. What was your vision of the culture? Was it supposed to be this like team forward camaraderie, whether that turned into Nerf gun wars or not? But like, what was the vision on culture, and how important is culture in terms of keeping a team together and then, building something, especially in a sales world, from nothing into something?
Yeah. So I want to be clear. The fun part of the culture came a few years after. We definitely didn't walk in the door and start having fun right out of the gate. So there was definitely those first few months, as I mentioned, I was probably not the most popular person there in the beginning. I had to make some big changes. I had to make some big culture shifts. I know there's people that I talk to today, they'll tell me, like, pardon my language, but I thought you were an asshole when you first came in. But now that I look back, I realize what you were doing, right? I couldn't have a quote unquote team with one person sitting 80 feet down at the other end of the office, one person in an office. I mean, there was zero communication. It was just like, oh, I'm going to do my thing. And if I get it done, cool. If I don't, right? So I did have to bring some level of accountability, kind of some of that, what I learned at Robert Half. But I'd say with a gentler approach, right? Like there's ways to do it without it being overbearing and like a detriment to the culture, right? And at the end of the day, I mean, accountability and holding somebody accountable, I mean, you're really looking out for them. It's hard for people to look at it that way in the beginning. But just like when you came in, we wanted you to be successful. We wanted everybody to be successful. The reality is our industry has a huge turnover rate, and we weren't immune from that. We had turnover.
Yep.
You saw it. We would hire people in, and sometimes it just didn't work out. And there's nothing you can do about that, right? Like that's part of the business. But the folks that came in and bought in, that got in with the team, would follow what we were asking them to do, and were actually successful. Those were the building blocks. So when you look back and, um, I joke around about we had a big team. We literally had a big team. I mean, I would put 5 or 6 of us on our team up against anyone in a tug of war contest. We were averaged
Huge.
about 6'3", 6'4". We'll leave the
Yep.
weight out, but we were a big team, right? And if you
Yeah.
just look at those key hires as we went along, and then whether it was JD or Jason or Paul or whoever, right, like yourself, and there was so many people that played into that, and then you take each one of those blocks and you add a couple people around them, right? And then you watch those people continue to get promoted or go into different roles and do different things. And that's how you're successful, right? It's not just the retention, but it's like, where do you put those key people in the same, or in the right seat, right?
Yeah.
Here at Parqa, we follow the EOS model, and there's a lot of stuff about, right person, right seat, right person, wrong seat, kind of looking at what the structure of your company is. And I feel like that's what we did good. We figured out where the strengths were, um, and we had our we had our normal staffing madness, right? Like, there's plenty of crazy stories that we're not going to talk on this podcast, but we went through that as well. And like I said, it's part of it, but I felt like we did a good job of building the core of the team to the point that, even with the distractions and the normal turnover, we were able to keep things growing and humming along.
Yeah. No, those are phenomenal answers. There are a couple of things kind of stood out when you were talking about that. It just jarred my memory of my time, my early days at Modus. Yes, there was a lot of accountability being done. I think you did a really good job, intentional or not. I never was like, man, Travis is mad at me. But was like, Travis is disappointed in me. And dude, that'll make you feel, and you talked about, we were big. That made me feel small, man. Sometimes when it was like, you knew what you were supposed to do, and whether it was by choice or by circumstance, you weren't able to get it done. It was effective. I knew the next week I wanted to work twice as hard because of it. And no, we did a really good job as a unit, just coming in there, busting ass, winning. I thought we did a really good job at winning. We established that out of the gate too. And at the same time, I thought you were very fair. Like, in the times that I worked my ass off, there were a couple of things you did for me out of the gate. I think I had a couple of raw things happen to me at the beginning, and you wanted to keep me motivated. And I don't know if you remember this, but you bought me dinner. You told me to go buy myself dinner and then bring you the check, and you did. And so I was dating somebody at the time, and we went to the North Beach Fish Camp, and I brought you the check, and for me, it was a check I had never really accumulated before. So I thought that was really nice of you. And then in the early parts, I had to go move that said person from Pennsylvania down to Florida, and you were like, just take the time off, don't worry about it.
Yeah,
And
I
so
mean, that's the one thing, right? Like, I'm fortunate I work for a company, we have unlimited PTO, right? It's one thing to say that, and then there's limited PTO, right? But at the end of the day, listen, if you work for me and you bust your ass and you do what you're supposed to do, and you're doing that, and there's a life circumstance that happens, like, go take care of it. Nobody ever came to me and said, hey, Travis, I got a dentist appointment, I'm gonna take half a day off. Like, that's not in my blood. That's not the way I operate. And to your previous point, thinking back, like, it was always interesting because it was, whether yourself or some others, like, you'd always say, hey, you got a minute, right? You come in and you shut the door in my office. I didn't have to bring stuff up. You guys brought it to me. And I think that's, to your point, that's a sign of a team that understands accountability. And you don't have to be, I don't have to stand over you and ask you what you're doing each day, right? Like, I felt like we addressed it in the huddles. We did what we need to do. People knew what the expectations were, and we did it. We moved on. And that's part of me. That's like being an adult and understanding what your job is and what you're supposed to do. And, from your end of it, living up to it. Right. And the fact that people would come to me shows me that I had the right people, right? Because you cared. It would bothered you. There's a lot of people that would go right along with could care less, right? And those were the ones that turned over. But the
very
people that
true.
cared were there and continued to win. And then, to your point, the major success and the records and the trophies and all the stuff that came along with it. That's what happens.
Yeah. It goes without saying, like, a lot of credit goes to you for fostering an environment where people actually felt comfortable going and doing that. It's not like we just showed up and said, "Oh, we care. Let's go talk to Travis." Like, you had to be welcoming in that. So,
And I want to be clear too, like for people, like it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, man. I mean, we had our battles. There was days we were mad at each other, right? I was mad at you. You were mad at me. We were mad at each other in the office, like not just us, but other people. Like it was, we cared enough that part of it came out, but we never let it. It was always, it could have been negative in the moment, but positively at the end of the day, we all sat down and worked everything out. And that's what's important. And when you have a team that works together and you look out for each other and you're being successful, you're doing the right things, that's all you can ask for. And that's going to happen no matter what the environment is.
Yeah, I absolutely don't want to sugarcoat that. When there were stretches where there was certainly some tempers, but one thing, just reflecting on it in real time right now, we never came out on the other side without resolution. Like we were mad, but we worked towards a solution. So yeah, thinking about the office and how things are now, you're mostly remote. I'm remote. Do you miss the office? Do you like? To me, it was really fun. I understand the convenience of being remote, but like we talked about camaraderie and whatnot. And I guess this question's two parts. Obviously, one, do you miss it? And two, do you think it's essential to building the kind of culture that we were describing earlier?
Do I miss it? I would say sometimes. I really do enjoy being able to get up in the morning and not rush. And I like to get up. I go for a walk in the morning. I listen to podcasts. There's days, depending on my schedule, sometimes I get back and I just sit down and start working. I don't even think anything about it. I'll look up at noon. I'm like, all right, hey, you've got some calls this afternoon. You should probably take a shower and actually, get out of your workout clothes and get dressed, right? So there's the convenience of it, but I definitely do miss the human interaction side of it, right? Like there's something about that. As you mentioned, I'm 100% remote unless I'm out at a conference. Our company went 100% remote in January. We had an office in Minneapolis. Went up there multiple times last year. I avoided it the entire winter this year, so excited. I didn't no snow for me this year, and but we don't have it anymore, so we are 100% remote, and it's definitely tougher to build that culture 100% remote, right? It's like, what do you do, especially think about the early days of the pandemic, of all the things we tried, right? To like, how do we keep the culture together? How do we have happy hours on, we play trivia, we do this, we do that. And we were actually having that conversation the other day. Like, we want to get everybody together, but it's like, everybody's different. It's, if you've got the team together and you head out for a happy hour, you head to somewhere, like everybody can find something, right? But it's like, from a remote standpoint, how do you do that? So, we're getting ready to start the first half of, we call it the first half of conference season. So for us, it's late March through kind of early June is the first half, and then there's a break, and then like October, November, December, or September, October, November is that. So I'm going to go from no interaction to being at a conference with people, working a booth, right? So it's culture shock sometimes. Like you don't think about it, but after a couple of years of being remote, like you don't lose your social skills, but it's just, you got to get used to being back around that many people and doing that piece of it. So from that standpoint, I do miss it.
Yeah, it might not be the social skills you lose, but I think maybe your social battery's charged a little differently.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And I want to unpack. I'm going to unpack the conferences and whatnot here in a bit when we get into the role at Parqa. Just for those who are still, watching in the staffing space, I'm kind of curious. There's two-pronged question here. You've met a lot of great sales folks. You've met a lot of great recruiters. You've met some really bad sales folks. You've met some bad recruiters. What are some of the key indicators for people? Like, what are some of the traits that people possess on the good side? The recruiters and the salespeople who came in and they hit their metrics or, overshot them. The ones that went to all-stars perennially, what did they do differently than everybody else?
I'd say that the two biggest things, they were consistent and persistent, right? So what I mean by that is, you kind of knew the metrics, you knew the KPIs, you knew how to get to where you needed to get to, very focused on the money, right? And I say that from money, not from a greed standpoint, but you're in sales, right? Money is a big thing. I always ask people in an interview, what's your motivator? right? If you're going to come do staffing and you're going to deal with people and you're going to do this for, 40 to however many hours a week you decide to work, right? There's got to be an element there that drives you to that, because if you're happy coming in on the base salary, you're going to burn out, you're going to be gone, and the motivation's not there. So, I think investing in your craft as well. And what I mean by that is I thought you did a good job of after hours. You taught yourself how to do certain things on LinkedIn to run searches, right? Like you went and took LinkedIn classes on your own, um, learning just about dev and the environments and understanding and befriending the feature 23s of the world, right? And you get to understand like, hey, folks that really want technical people, that was the biggest complaint. We were in IT. It's like, oh, well, your recruiter doesn't even know what they're talking about, right? So when you're able to have those conversations and you ask somebody whether the uh, three pillars of object-oriented programming, and they kind of sit back in their seat and they're like, well, do you know it? I'm like, yeah, I know what they are, right? And that makes a difference. So it's really just, it's being invested in the roles, taking a little extra time, and then just buying into it, right? Like I think so many people fight it. Oh, I don't need to make this many calls a day. I don't need to do that. I don't need to do that. And those are the ones that are consistently underperforming and eventually work themselves out of the system. So, that's what I would say is that the top people, kind of back to what we talked about before, we cared, right? Caring is a big part of it, right? Buying into the role and investing in your profession, but then just being consistent and persistent are really important.
Yeah, no, those are all really good answers. I'm writing the book. One thing you said just really jumped out at me, and I wanted to share this part of it. One of the things I put in there is that you need to find value in every call, and you need to fail forward. And so for the people, and listen, I was resistant. Trust me, you know better than anybody. I was very resistant. Just pick up the phone for the sake of it. I was always the one. I got to protect my time. I don't want to waste my time. Well, mindset shift. If you pick up the phone and make a call, you're not wasting your time because you can find value in every single interaction. And it doesn't have to be that dense. If somebody slams the phone and hangs up on you, now you're learning to deal with rejection. There's the value. But if somebody's not interested, but they could teach you a little bit about their skill set, well, now you just learned something new, right? That you can apply the next phone call.
Yeah. And it's to your point, like it's what can you get out of each interaction that's mutually beneficial, right? Like it's not, you don't always want to get, right? You have to give back, and maybe you don't have the right role for somebody, but you introduce them to something else. And I just think about it now, like the way the industry's going, right? With chatbots and AI and all of these different things.
Yeah.
I sound like the old guy here. Is like, oh, well, we had fax machines, right? No, we did use fax machines for timesheets, but like I remember in the early days at Robert Half, like, and this wasn't that long ago, but when you interviewed a candidate, they came in, they filled out all their paperwork on a regular interview, right? So if they were just coming in to meet Randall for the first time, you asked them to bring their IDs, and they filled out their I-9 and their W-4 and their application. So if you got them a job, they didn't have to come back in. And now you think about it, like nobody comes to an office, right? It's all electronic onboarding. Everything is just like it's completely different worlds. And so I think when you talk about like getting something out of every call and every interaction, that's even harder now than it was before, right? Like it's on a different level.
Yep.
And everybody's had to do it. So that's a big transition that's happened in the industry.
Yeah, you're 100% right about finding the value in the conversations. I will say that the one thing that has stayed true, and trust me, my tenure in this does not go back to the fax machine days, but from 2016 and my very first phone call to now in 20, the authenticity of the conversation is as paramount and as important today as it ever was. So being able to get them on the phone and actually build a relationship with them so that they know you're a real person is so much more important right now than it's ever been. And obviously the way this thing is going, it's only going to get substantially more and more important as well.
Yeah. And the hard part of that is it takes time to build that relationship too, right? And a lot of employers aren't patient. Not employers from the ones looking for people, like the employers of Randall Thomas, who are like, you got to place somebody last week, right? We know a story of somebody that went to a role recently, and they just, their expectations were that, we're going to start rolling in the door. And the reality was it was going to take time to build that relationship. Like, and it's the same thing on the candidate side. So I think that ramp period and that understanding is going back to it, just made me kind of jump back a little bit, but like what makes people successful, like that ramp period, like there's certain obstacles. People that buy into it from the beginning and do that piece of it are good. You can look back, and most of the ones that didn't work out fought the ramp period the whole time too.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought that up because I've been mentoring a couple of recruiters. One of them still at Modus. And they were just like, the ones that have been doing this for 1 year, 2 year, 3 years are like getting beat up. Unfortunately, they're recruiting, depending on what industry they're in, they're recruiting in a super down market and then everybody's getting beat up. But there's, how did you do it? And I will never run away from this. I was in an environment that fostered failure or gave me the opportunity to fail. I failed. I remember the whiteboard and we had the interviews and the leads. And I was like, I'm determined to be the only person who has a name in those boxes. I'm going to fill them up. And I filled up all the interviews and all the leads and they didn't go anywhere. And at that point I learned like maybe I was moving too quick. Maybe I wasn't like paying attention to the details or whatever the case may be. But I failed, but I learned. And so you're spot on about the ramp. I hope anybody who's in staffing leadership watching this, like, please embrace the ramp. You really don't know what you had, because if I only went off my first 12 weeks, I wouldn't even be in staffing anymore. And I turned out okay,
Absolutely.
We were talking about the value in phone calls. It reminds me of a call. I hope you remember this. Remember, I was working on a service desk role, and I think it was contract to hire. I got this guy on the phone, and he was like, "What is it? What does it pay?" And I gave him the hourly rate, and we were walking through what that looked like annually, and he was like, "There's only 48 weeks in a year."
Oh yeah, remember this one very well.
And I was kind of early on. In the staffing game. So you're kind of watching it. You're like, "Oh man, Randall's getting frustrated." I'm gonna kind of like pay attention, see how this goes. I was on the phone with him for like 20 minutes. I'm like, dude, there's 52 weeks in a year. The reason I was getting frustrated is because he was so brazen. He was like, "Did you even go to school? What school did you go to? Like, what kind of poor education did you have? There's 4 weeks in every month. There's 12 months a year. 12 times 4 is 48. And dude, I'm trying to be professional. Hey man, every third month there's a fifth week. There's 52 weeks in a year. There's 13 weeks in a quarter." And you were like, "Hey man, just transfer him into me." And so I transferred him, and I was like, hopefully Travis can square him up. And I remember he gave you the business too. Like, y'all are just trying to do me dirty. So I guess I brought that up. It is funny looking back on it. Maybe there's not as much value in every conversation as before, because that one I felt a little dumber than when it started. But
we learned that there's people out there that think there's 48 weeks in the year. He also thinks the earth is flat too. So I mean, it's all good.
That's actually a good point. To everybody in the recruiting business who's actually listening and watching this, there are 52 weeks in a year. Use Google if you have to.
2,080 hours.
2,080 hours. Awesome. So we know kind of the staffing journey. We know what it takes to be successful in staffing. We know that you left staffing in pretty much the smack dab heart of the pandemic. You went on to do
early stages. I left I think we kind of shut down everything in March or April of that year. And
I know that January of the next year.
Yeah, I accepted the role on Christmas vacation at the end of that year. And then I was there a couple weeks in January and then headed out.
Yeah. I remember it wasn't my favorite day at Modus, but obviously you went into the real estate venture, and now you're at Parqa, which does a lot of marketing. Obviously you talked about you go to a lot of different conferences, but like, can you kind of help better like paint the picture of what you guys do?
Yeah. And so I'm going to back out of the marketing thing a little bit. We were founded in the marketing space. So started in 2000 as a traditional marketing agency for staffing and recruiting companies. So more of the put the quarter in the machine model of, branding and social media and things like that. Today, we leverage technology, automation, data, AI, marketing, and experience design in the staffing and recruiting world to help businesses grow. And so what I mean by that is we've really honed in on the Bullhorn, I can't talk right now, Bullhorn and Salesforce ecosystems, right? Only because Bullhorn's the biggest one in the industry. Salesforce is picking up a lot of steam in the staffing and recruiting world. But between the Bullhorn marketplace and the app exchange with Salesforce, the ancillary tools that come along with it, and even some of the tools that come out of the box with it, allow to create these candidate experiences, these client experiences, the automations of the worlds, right? So being able to make your business more efficient, from a marketing standpoint, putting people into sequences and outreach and things like that. So some of the taking those manual processes from the past, automating them, using the technology, being able to create a better experience for your clients and your candidates, right? So whether it's gaining new business, interestingly enough, Bullhorn came out with their grid report they do each year. Just came out this past week. The number one priority for companies was winning new business. Number two was creating better candidate experiences. And number three was digital transformation. I think one of our old colleagues from Modus, Jeremy Smith, posted on, he's like, it's the same conversations over and over again, right? Like a lot of these things we talk about, we've been talking about for 20 years, right, in our industry. Yeah. And so that's what really drove me to Parqa is like, I look back and, the industry as a whole was so far behind from a technology standpoint and even a lot of points in the marketing side, right? And then the pandemic hit and I feel like we caught up. We made this major like light speed advance into I'm calling it semi-modernization, right? Because we're still behind. Like that's the thing. I think we were at Bullhorn Engage last year and it was like 29 or I'm going to get this wrong. Either 29, like 31% of staffing and recruiting companies use automation. And in like the industrial world, 100% of companies use it, right? And it's like as much as it's been talked about and that's where AI is coming into play, right? And it scares me because everybody's like, oh, we're going to use AI. It's like, you don't have the foundation blocks in place to use AI, right? Like we got to get the rest of this in order. So what we do is we help companies with strategic initiatives to grow their business. So we don't replace their marketing team. We don't replace their IT team. We come in, we help them create strategic solutions. We have Bullhorn, Salesforce expertise, designers, all of that in-house. So we're able to execute on the work as well. And then we help them optimize it over time. So we continue to help grow that business.
That's awesome, man. And hearing about that, so many thoughts are rattling. Number one, that was a substantially lower number on the automation front than I was expecting. I wasn't expecting 100% just because obviously I've been in this business, but you were right. We got on a rocket ship during the pandemic, and I understand that we've kind of, the market's been a little tumultuous. I understand the return to office orders. We've kind of reverted back to some older tendencies, but I still expected us from at least a transformation perspective to continue to like push the ball forward a little bit.
Well, think about it. I mean, how many companies went from overnight of, hey, everybody's on site to we have to have the infrastructure for our business to run remote or we're going out of business.
Yeah.
That was a crazy period there for a couple months. And then, now, as you mentioned, they're starting to see some that come back to the office and, but the upgrade of systems. And I tell you that I think one of the biggest things people discount is data. And I don't care what system you use, what automation tool you put in, what design you want to build for experiences. Like if your data is not good, you're going to struggle, right? It's the foundation of the house, right? And if it's cracked, it's never going to work. And so, we end up doing a lot of that too when we go in. We end up doing data work and we end up doing some cleanup to get them to a spot where they can then execute and really leverage that technology because they've made huge investments in it, right? And a lot of people get frustrated. Oh, we implemented this and it doesn't work. Well, implementation is the starting line, not the destination. I say that all the time. People look at go live as this big victory lap. And I'm like, man, you're literally crossing the starting line, not the finish line, because now you have to make it work. Now you have to add the ancillary tools in. Now you have to leverage it. Each company works different, right? They're not the same. It's how do you leverage that in your market with your messaging to your persona and ICP of buyers, like how are you doing that? People don't think about that piece of it. They watch a really good demo, like, hey, this is cool, this could run our business. As we've seen in certain scenarios, it gets set up exactly like the old system, and it's not this big leap forward that's expected, right? And that's where we come in and help that happen.
Okay. You're right, though. I think obviously people are investing a ton of money in that. Whenever it goes live, they just want to see it work because of what they've put in financially. I get it, but it is part of, financials are just part of the investment. The data is obviously the premium piece here. It's and keeping it clean, keeping it organized, but keeping it current. I can break this down to the simplest form. Like if you go run a search in the database for, candidates to fill a job, but everything you have in there is 10 years old, you're not really giving yourself the best chance to find the right people at the right time. So,
Randall, the nice part is like with the advances in technologies, like I have partners, they use AI. They update it real time in the background. You don't even know what's going on. So they're out there updating it with public information, names, phone numbers, email addresses, all that stuff. It pops it into tear sheets. Like there's tools out there to make life much easier, right? And it's just being able to be, like I said, I always use strategic, right? Like that's the word, because everything we talk about doing is strategy, execution, optimization. But I think optimization is the word that's kind of like the buzzword in the industry for 20. And that's because over these last couple of years, people have made all these investments, and now it is time to optimize it and make it actually work and get it.
that's great, man. Now that that's happening, not every company's doing that, right? It's only
Correct.
a certain percentage. Is that the new big thing in staffing? Is trying to get AI to keep your data clean and keep the resumes and the prospects up to date? Is there something else coming down the pipeline that we should be made aware of?
No, that's one aspect of it. I mean, I think AI in general, all the way around, from writing job descriptions to writing candidate write-ups to chatbots to, I mean, they have conversational AI now, where those phone calls we were talking about earlier, you can now be talking to a bot. There's it's accelerating at a wild pace, right? And I think everybody's looking at a way like, how can I use this as an advantage, right? And once again, it depends on each company. It depends on how advanced they are. It depends on how willing they are to try new technology, and that's really with any. But with AI, I mean, the possibilities are limitless out there right now. So it's we have a friend, Maurice Fuller. He's got an organization called Staffing Tech, and he had a quote out there. He said, "We're going to see more advancement in the next 5 years than we've seen in the last 20 years in our industry when it comes to technology." And it's really around AI and the capabilities that it's able to.
Do we fully trust AI? Like, are we overshooting the use of it? And like,
So there's a lot of talk on there, right? Like around bias and different things like that. And if you listen to any of the Salesforce presentations, like Salesforce's big thing is trusted AI. There's been some stuff in the news lately I'm not going to go into, but some of the AI models have definitely have certain, you know, programs, thoughts to it. So it depends on the application, right? It really does. I mean, there's so many. You want to trust it, but you always have that in the back of your mind that yes, there are some. You have the tendency for biasy and different other things.
okay, I thought that going through as somebody like in the staffing profession in COVID, I thought was probably gonna be the biggest like roller coaster ride of my life. And little did I know, I think that is going to pale in comparison to the changes that are about to take place between now and 20.
Yeah, no, it's. I'll tell you, I went to Salesforce Connections in Chicago last June. Actually, it was late May, early June. And, I sat in the keynote, and Connections is kind of marketing focused, but their big thing was data, AI, and CRM. And so sitting in this keynote, the company they were focusing on was General Mills, right? The food company out of Minneapolis. It's wild to look at the advances that are coming, right? And whether it's just the AI in the CRM. If you're a Slack user, now there's Slack GPT. If you tie that into Salesforce, you can now get all your account data with simple commands. And the wild thing to me was Data Cloud, and they use AI in their Data Cloud, and it's like, hey, well, let's show you how this works, right? And they pull it up, and it's now an LM, natural language model, so you don't even have to know how to run queries. You literally typed in, show me all females between the age of 40 to 60 that bought a box of Cheerios in the last 60 days. Enter. Right?
That's wild.
It does all of this for you. Now, here's the best part, because this is marketing focused. Now you have this, they drop it into a campaign in Marketing Cloud. They send them a coupon for Cheerios or whatever it is, right? This is just one of the examples. But that's the level that it's going to get to very quickly, to where it's not just the, hey, it's updating data, but it's like it's able to take that data and then act on it on your behalf in the background. And that's where I think the advancements for some of these companies, the ones that are sitting on the sidelines kind of waiting,
they're going to be left in the dust.
They might get left behind, right? Like it's definitely something you have to keep a pulse on and at least pay attention to what's happening.
Further, let's talk about boutique firms or maybe medium-sized firms, the ones that are looking to make a leap, try to grow their revenue. Maybe they're being aggressive in that. What do you think is the number one thing that is it AI that they need to be doing to move forward? Is it branding? Do they need to start pumping content? Do they need to start working on image? Do they need to start working on getting their systems right in terms of maybe implementing something like Bullhorn? Like what's the key thing to get people to go from here and take the next step?
Well, your brand awareness is always key, right? People have to know who you are. If they don't know who you are and they don't know you exist, it's going to be hard to do business, right? So that's one. I think systems are huge, right? And we focus on the Bullhorn and Salesforce systems. There's other ones out there, right? Like there's plenty of tools that are out there that can be used. I know everybody focuses on AI, but I still don't think the industry's scratched the surface on automation, right? There's some that are really good at it. There's some that it's still the welcome to your first day, happy birthday, you've been on assignment for 30 days, your job ends in 2 weeks, right? Like it's very simple. It's not even really taking a lot of tasks off of their plate. And it's not enhancing that experience, right? So I still think getting into automation and starting to really leverage it and build out your utilization strategy is key. We've been doing that for a lot of folks that, hey, well, we bought automation, we just haven't been using it. It's like they've been paying for it for 9 months. How do we use it, right? So just understanding how to leverage it to grow the business, not just as another basic touch point with candidates.
Yep. Yeah. No, that's good. I personally think, this is my 2 cents on it, I'm not saying that this is what will take somebody to the next level, but I think it's something that's incredibly underutilized. With everybody returning to office, I think the use of texting platforms did not ramp with it. And I think, if you're going to try and call candidates all day and they're at work, it's going to be really hard to get them on the phone. If you can automate your text messages out of your ATS and send text messages and engage people's desire to make a move just through a text and set up a call in that direction, just from an automation perspective and an accessibility perspective, I think will absolutely differentiate you from a lot of your competition.
Well, the beauty is, I agree with you on that. And the beauty is there's tools for that, but there's also tools where your SMS is part of the package. And what I mean by that, it's a multi-pronged approach to outreach. So you might make that phone call, but then your SMS is automated. Then there's a LinkedIn, like there's all of the manual processes that dragged you down for hours in an office 5 to 7 years ago. You can automate a lot of that, right? And there's arguments about, well, is it personal enough? But, you can automate to a point to where it becomes a personal interaction. Yeah. And then that's when the human element takes over.
Or you can create the prompt, right? You can make it personal and then have that and then automate that prompt so it doesn't look impersonal at all. I think there's ways around that.
Yeah, and I think you said a key word there, prompt. I think if people aren't looking at AI prompting now and aren't at least messing with it or trying to use it or leverage it, you can get a Chat GPT account for free. You don't have to buy the premium one. You can get Gemini. There's so many of them out there now that are free. And, if you haven't tried it yet, try it. Just start messing around, ask it to do simple things, and start to prompt it and start to, um, figure out ways that you can use it, right? Like, you don't have to use it. It's not going to take over your business, right? But try to figure out one way that, AI can help you on a daily basis. I use it all the time, right? Even if it's just ideation, right? If I'm like, I've got this idea in my head, I'm thinking about it, but I can't put it onto paper. Like, I'll pop it into Chat GPT and say, hey, help me with an outline for this. This is what I'm thinking. This is who it's focused towards. Here's my thought process. Boom, hit it. And you can actually now, when you sign in, you can tell it like, hey, this is my role. Here's what I focus on. Answer all of my questions in this manner. Right. And so it becomes your personal assistant. It really does. I mean, it's to be able to bounce ideas, especially we mentioned working remote, you're by yourself, right? Like, it's an easy way to get ideas out there, and then, leverage it. If there's subjects you're trying to learn about, if you want to learn about automation, if you learn about some of these things, there's so much data out there.
Yeah. I think we could talk about this for days.
Yes.
We have talked about it for days, but I think obviously here we could talk about it for days. I know we're kind of coming up on time here, and nothing would make me happier than for us to revisit this in a few weeks or a few months. But for those who heard a little bit about what you do, right, and maybe they're looking to grow or take the next step, or maybe try to implement processes or tools or whatever the case may be, and could use Parqa's services, how can they best get a hold of you? What is something that they can go take a look at to get a little bit more information?
Yeah, you can always visit our website. It's Parqa. It's PARQA.com. So Parqa.com. My email is twebb@parqamarketing.com. They can email me there, but either way you can get a hold of me. I'd be happy to talk through it, even if it's just bouncing ideas or questions off. Hey, we're thinking about this, we're thinking about that. As you can tell, after 20 years of being on the other side, now being on this part of the staffing and recruiting, I'm passionate about it. I love the stuff. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm a builder, right? So seeing how all of these things come together and work together is it's exciting. So yeah, if anybody's interested in learning more, like I said, you can visit our website. You can reach out to me directly, and I'd be glad to have a conversation.
Awesome. And I'll put all of that in the show notes as well, so that they can just copy and paste if they need to.
Perfect.
Awesome. Travis, thank you so much. Obviously, we've been able to work together for a long time, but being able to do something like this and exchange ideas over what we've learned the last 7 years it means a lot to me. So I appreciate you taking some time and being on here today.
No, thank you for having me. I do these for the company, and I'm on the other end of it. So it's nice to be a part of this. And no, I like I said, I'm glad you're doing this and highlighting some of the folks here in the community that are a big part of it. And I'm fortunate to know a lot of the folks that you've talked to or are going to talk to. And so I appreciate you having me on, and I'd love to come back in the future.
Of course, man. I appreciate it. And we'll absolutely do that.
Sounds good.
All right. Awesome, man.